yet. Good afternoon, everybody. We tried that at the opening and it worked, and I turned it back to Tomashi to say, Tomashi, Tomashi. So y'all could have joined in. Okay, well, welcome to CAM, and thank you all so much for spending your Saturday with us. There are a few competing events that tends to happen in this city, but we're so glad that you are here with us today. I also said this on Thursday, but this exhibition and time with Miranda and Tomashi truly feel like a reunion, and it's just such a beautiful offering to kind of rekindle and reunite in ways. I met Miranda in 2007 while she was a curatorial assistant at the Manil collection. I met Tomashi in 2015, which I can share a little bit about in one moment. But first, it's important to just note, Tomashi Jackson Across the Universe is an exhibition that looks at Tomashi's work over the last 10 years. So of course you're going to hear from us today, and we really want to spend some time with you all to ask questions and give some space and time for that. So my connection with Tomashi in 2015 was while I was a curator at Project Row Houses. I learned a few days ago actually that she was already coming to Houston to do, she was on a travel research opportunity, and it just happened that William Cordova, an artist that I was working with at the time for Summer Studios, also invited Tomashi to come down and engage in a kind of mentorship moment with us. It was a really kind of beautiful summer, full of curiosity, full of just deep exploration into what Tomashi was kind of thinking about while she was a student at Yale, and really kind of thinking about her family's connection to Third Ward, which I think she is from Houston, but she grew up in Los Angeles, and really has, I think, longed for a kind of return in some ways back to Houston. So when she came to Third Ward, she was doing some local research of the 1950 Supreme Court case Sweat versus Painter, which really challenged Sweat's admittance into the UT Law School and was really pivotal to Thurgood Marshall's 1954 case, Brown versus Board of Education. She was also really interested in going on a bit of a Texas tour, a kind of deep research, but this was halted because in 2015 we had a tragic summer for Black women. Dejaria Becton was assaulted by the police, a 15-year-old girl who in McKinney, Texas was assaulted and treated and just discussed disregard of her humanness as a youth. And then Sandra Bland was kidnapped and murdered right outside of Prairie View. That was a kind of significant moment for us because it just didn't feel safe. It didn't feel safe to navigate. It didn't feel safe for someone who doesn't know the landscape of Texas and for Houston to, truly move around. And we felt it was best to make a decision to, not travel. But all of the work in some ways you will see is informed by that summer and that research and the personal experience that Tomashi had. The exhibition is split up in 3 sections. So there's this early work, which is created from 2014 to 2016. There's Vibrating Boundaries, this kind of middle section, which is connected to Joseph Albert's theory of the relativity of color, which really describes this kind of optical illusion where the edges of 2 contrasting colors appear to vibrate when placed side by side. This effect is really prominent with complementary colors, which are of course opposite of one another on a color wheel. This kind of vibration, if you will, is an illusion caused by color, emphasizing each other, making the edges seem to kind of move or vibrate. We'll unpack this a bit during the walkthrough. This impact can truly kind of play with the viewer's perception and emotional response to a composition. That and the kind of layeredness of Tomashi's research on colorable law, which is this relationship between law, policy, and skin color, is something that you see while it's in this section. It truly reverberates throughout the galleries. And then to the far left is the recent works, which are all created from Tomashi's time in Colorado. And we have a kind of special treat that we'll talk about from one of the works which are specific to Houston, or for Houston, for the camp. So the exhibition has big themes, such as civil rights histories that connect us to labor, state and national violence through law, policy, and education. The exhibition connects us to land, and I would also say to family, and the ability to explore personal freedoms when democracy isn't working. All of this in some ways is kind of blurred because it isn't revealed as explicit, right? You walk into this space, it's colorful, it's joyous, there are Boys to Men is reverberating throughout this gallery, and you kind of want to do a body roll, but you can't, or you can. And this is really purposeful, right? It showcases the brilliance of Tomashi's thinking and process, thinking deeply about materials, tangible materials, and then the research materials, and of course, Miranda's beautiful, ways in which you have put this show together from a series of micro exhibitions, right, that have happened over the last 10 years. So I just want y'all to hold that framing in your head, and I think I'm gonna turn it over to Miranda, and we'll highlight a few works throughout each space.
Very cool, thank you, Ryan. Thank you so much for having us at Camp Houston. It's really a joy for both of us to be back here. And I've said this before, but Tomashi, I love seeing your work in this context where we can actually visually see the connections between earlier work and later work in this beautiful open space. So I love seeing the visual connections. We thought we'd pick, 3 paintings to focus on, and we'll begin with Degeria All Alone, just around the corner. As Ryan talked about, Tomashi, your work, just acknowledging the deep research involved in your work, and this commitment to telling stories about our country and about democracy, but doing it in a way that highlights individuals. So, in other words, making big issues very approachable and tangible through individual lives, and doing so in dialogue with color and how painting works, and actually how painting can be pushed. How can we expand our idea of what a painting is through materials, through being three-dimensional, through incorporating printmaking, sculpture, etc. So we wanted to highlight some Texas connections in particular through the show because we've been talking about how there's Texan elements that run through the work, and so beginning with an homage to Degeria, Degeria All Alone, Bowling versus Sharp, McKinney Pool Party. And as Ryan talked about, the birth of this piece was a tragic event, an assault of a 15-year-old, Degeria Becton, by a police officer in McKinney, Texas. And you're brought into Degeria, her story, by seeing her face on the photo transfer, by identifying who was this person, and then you're brought in to other historical moments, including a moment at Texas Southern University, which was the site where the case was argued. Actually, I should back up and say, one of the stories laced into these narratives about Texas is the story of education and how many, 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 many court cases were fought in order to desegregate schools in the United States. So many of us as school children learned about Brown versus Board of Education, landmark case in 1964, which struck down separate versus equal as a premise for schools and other institutions. But not everyone knows that Thurgood Marshall and many others argued over 650 cases in different states and cities, each piece by piece dismantling the logic behind segregation. And one such case was for a law student at Texas Southern University. And So acknowledging the legacy of that case through these images that you see on top at the in the photo transfer, layered on top of Dajeria. And Tomashi, something I hope we'll talk more about is actually this act of layering, of pulling together elements from the recent past with events that happened, say, decades ago, and understanding how there are historical connections between them.
Thank you, Miranda. And thanks everyone for being here. Yeah, I have a civil rights attorney mentor I was introduced to by my best friend, Nia K. Evans, who herself is a child advocate and a specialist in education policy research. I didn't know what any of this had to do with me or with art. Is this too loud? Okay, sorry, dear. Thank you. It'll pass. It will. Everything. This too shall pass. Back in 2013, well, after Trayvon Martin was murdered and his murderer was found not responsible for his actions as an adult targeting a child, a lot of people who were adults remember that time and having some sort of reaction to that tragic event among many, what ends up being like almost like a Rolodex of tragic events of the devaluation of the lives of children of color and of black and brown people, young people and adults in public space. So there was one such pivotal event that led my best friend to join the nation's oldest NAACP chapter and to offer her volunteer services as an education policy specialist. And in the process of that, she ends up being a part of this coalition that does this work to try to save what remained of yellow school bus service for Boston Public Schools. And then I got involved as her in-house artist to try to let more people know outside of their circles through visualizing this when I was still using Facebook. And we'd go down to Boston Common and talk to young people, talk to young queer, homeless youth. We're letting families know that they're about to, that if they have children in the BPS system, they're about to lose their yellow school bus service. And I'm going to these hearings with Nia. This is 2013, and I'm going to hearings with Nia, and I'm really amazed at what I'm seeing. I'm seeing things that I thought were histories that were a long time ago. I'm seeing steely-faced adults sitting behind tables, rationalizing, making tens of thousands of children less safe getting to and from school, abdicating their duty to keep these children safe getting to and from school. And it was shocking to me. And at the time, I was a nanny taking care of other people's children, and I was like, if something happened to those children, my life would be over. It's so bizarre to watch these adults just throw their hands up and say that all these children can take the bus and the train to school in inclement weather, and we don't care anymore. It was just really, really bizarre. And then I started to remember that I had been a child on school buses going to my performing and visual arts magnet school at USC. Brienne's wearing a USC jersey right now. There's a 32nd Street School is a magnet school for the performing and visual arts on that campus. That's where I went to school. And I now know all of these projects start to reveal to me that at every step of the way, my access to the visual arts and humanities through educational spaces and in community spaces was informed by the work that happened here. It all started in these places where these battles were fought for school desegregation, for access to resources, not necessarily for everybody to be friends, but for access to resources that were being held from people who too were paying into a system that we were not benefiting from. So none of that had ever been historicized for me. So I'm like an adult in these situations where the lights are starting to turn on, and I was like, and then Nia's starting to help me understand that what we were seeing is not about these children in the present really, which is what shocked me, but we were seeing a generational commitment to undoing the gains made after Brown v. Board of Education, the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, all of these things, but I'm only starting to understand them piece by piece. So Dajeria All Alone and this whole body of work happens after that. I'd started making paintings again after not making paintings for a while, and I go to Yale for painting and printmaking because I wanted to be where people took painting seriously. And more black children are disappearing. More strange things are happening, and I'm reading the materials that Nia and the advocates have turned me on to, including this really important paper called "The Essence of Innocence: Consequences for Dehumanizing Black Children" that had been produced by the American Psychological Society. A part of a multi-part study on the use of excessive force when police are dealing with black and brown children. So, I've come to Texas to focus on Sweat versus Painter. Haman Marion Sweat was a black man who was a postal worker here in Houston. He wanted to go to the University of Texas at Austin Law School, and he presented an incredible application that was so stellar that the president of the law school, Theophilus Painter, hand wrote a response to him saying that this is one of the most amazing applications we've ever received, and were it not for your being a Negro, you would certainly be able to be a student here. So the issue, of course, is not his being black. The issue, of course, are racist policies of exclusion. But this becomes a tangible tool for Thurgood Marshall and the LDF to work it as one of a key case, one of the 650 cases, to eventually be a foothold toward Brown v. Board of Education. So while I'm looking at this history of the perception of color and its impact on the value of human life in public space, Dejaria Becton and Tatiana Rhodes and all these children are attacked by Eric Casebolt and these other officers in McKinney. And so I'm trying to reckon with, it's a good place for this, our catalog. Robin D.G. Kelly writes really well about this in the catalog. I think I get emotional about this stuff, so the writers, Miranda and the other writers, write better than I feel like I can speak about this. But there's a collapsing. In my experience, I was like researching, I'm reading cases, I'm spending time in the law library at Yale, and then I'm going back to my studio trying to visualize this. I don't assume that it's going to be through portraiture. I'm actually trying to address issues of abstraction and composition. I'm being reintroduced to Joseph Albert's 1963 text Interaction of Color. I'm relearning optically this language of teaching color and seeing color, and that optical illusions appear when certain colors are interacting with each other. If we were to stare at this long enough and close our eyes, we'll see an after image of a line against our will. So too, when orange meets blue, we're going to see a dark shadow where there is none. We're going to see a bright light where there is none. And I'm seeing a correlation, a linguistic correlation in these cases from the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, and the optical illusions associated, the panic, the discomfort associated with color interaction. So that shows up here as I'm also trying to grapple with making something that doesn't already exist. I've been studying art history since I was like 7 because of my access to the arts through public education. There's a really great public arts high school here, a very famous one. You produced like a lot of amazing artists over the years. I consider myself a part of that history. And so since I was a child, I've wondered if I had something to contribute to art history, mustn't I make something that doesn't already exist, given that so much great work has already existed? So what happens throughout all of these pieces is I'm trying to grapple with making something that literally just doesn't exist already. And Dejaria All Alone is one of those things. The pockets recur, trying to make work that can hold a story, that can hold objects. It's just, they're kind of like ticks. And then finally, the something else that happened here that carries over is creating pastes from earthen materials. I started doing that with soil from the sand in front of the row house that Ryan and Rick and William allowed me to work in that summer. It continues as I move through Atlanta, Ohio, the east end of Long Island, New York City, Greece, Colorado. I take to mixing my own material to paint into that eventually resolves. The further I try to push away from the canvas as a square or a rectangle that already exists or presupposes what a painting is, the closer I find myself into the materials that our elders used, marble dust, animal skin glue as a vehicle, whiting to prime surfaces and to paint into them, turning a natural canvas into a piece of stone. I'll stop there.
Thank you. I think something.
I don't know what just happened. Sorry.
No, that was beautiful. Thank you, Tomashi. I think just something to acknowledge that I especially love about the CAM iteration of this show is that the first face you see when you enter the room is Nia K. Evans. Hi, Nia.
Where's Nia?
And so, Tomashi, you were talking about the pivotal role that Nia's advocacy work has been throughout your practice, and that commitment to assembling the facts, drawing together connecting the dots with our histories. And so I just love the fact that that's the first face you see when you enter the show. So I think we're gonna go next to time and space. Just acknowledging there are other works related to Project Row Houses, an incredible video that we encourage you to spend time with.
And there are video collages. There are video collages back there that we're not going to touch on, but the sight lines in this space allow them to really interact with the sight lines of the rest of the work in ways that we really haven't been able to experience with the other iterations of the show. And I just want to acknowledge that there's a video collage on the other side of that wall that was made at Project Row Houses with Houstonian artists helping me, Patrick Renner and Emily Peacock, and Ryan was there when those were filmed. A lot of what ends up happening with these video collages that I wanted to experience. I wanted to make an experience that invited people to sit with the video the way that I watch people sit with those Rothkos in the chapel. Because in art school, those of us who get to go to art school or get to be with other people who are obsessed with making moving images and two-dimensional images and sculptures, we learn that no one's going to sit with your video for more than 10 seconds. No one's going to do it. That's what we learn. We're told, like, you can put your whole soul into it. In fact, you better, and then be prepared for no one to pay attention to it. But then I go to the Rothko Chapel because Ryan and them told me that I should go there, and there are prayer books in the front. In fact, everyone who's not been going there should go there. I hear the attendance has been down, but there people go in there to stay. When I went there, they had to come and tell people to leave. There was a line of people still trying to get in at closing time. People want to go and sit with these paintings and be immersed in them. I thought color field painting was a scam, because on the West Coast, muralism in the built environment is like largely impactful because it figuratively tells the stories of the people. And then I'm looking in these art history books and I'm seeing these little tiny plates of these black and white reproductions of these, Barnett Newmans and stuff, and I'm like, okay, I mean, I'll get an A on the test, but I don't really believe that this is as impactful as this history is saying that it is. But then I get to New York, I go to school, my teacher sends me to the MoMA, I see a Barnett Newman zip painting for the first time, and I'm literally brought to my knees by it. I had my own physical experience where quiet color can leave me pensive. And I found that while all of these bizarre devaluations of the lives of people in public and private space are happening as if it's normal, no one wants to stay and deal with it, but I'm kept up at night by it. So with the Tale of Two Michaels and Vibrating Boundaries, the Law of the Land, there's an attempt to create these endurance exercises with color that are really inspired by Rothko, who was a children's art teacher. By these, Barnett Newman ran for mayor of the city of New York. Color field painters were not people who did not care about the worlds around them. And they were not people who, like us, were not surviving world war, So what is our responsibility? So the work continues to try to make these spaces of meditation that acknowledge these issues of public concern using composition and color as a place to sit and meditate with them and not turn away. Sorry, I wasn't supposed to do that.
That was great. That was beautiful.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about Pnyx or Time and Space?
Well, Pnyx for Crystal Mason is another Texas story. But they're both Texas stories because LBJ is in that one. So
yeah, and
maybe just highlight Still Remains because of the introduction of the brown paper bag and materials. We're all around, but that's okay.
But luckily, this will be the longest iteration that we've gotten to enjoy with the show, so we encourage you to keep coming back. These works are about Texas, are really inspired by Texas and Georgia. My first solo museum exhibition invitation came from the Zuckerman Museum of Art at Kennesaw State University. When I was spoken to about what that show could be or where that show would be, I was spoken with about Atlanta. When I got there, I realized that Cobb County is not Atlanta. I had been carrying a book around with me that I really, it's on our pamphlet. I really suggest people who like history or to read it. It's called White Flight: Atlanta and the Making of Modern Conservatism by Kevin M. Cruz, one of my favorite living historians who does his work out of Princeton, but he does it anyway. He would do it anyway, I think. That book and conversations with people that I met in Atlanta helped me understand that there was a long history of voting referenda that prevented the expansion of public transportation in an effective way to stop the movement of certain people from Atlanta's inner city core after Reconstruction and after Reconstruction and then again after the Civil Rights Act and the whole package of Great Society legislation. I didn't understand that because I don't have any people there, like Texas and California is where my people are. When I got there, I was surprised by the gridlock, the kind of gridlock that I associate with Southern California and with Los Angeles. And then people started explaining to me why that was, that there was this history of voting referenda that just stopped it, that stopped. So Interstate Love Song and Still Remains embody that. Dr. John Teal Robinson, who was the director, I believe she still is, the director of the Tuskegee University Art Gallery, gave me a bag full of voting ephemera. That year, the most expensive congressional race in history had taken place between John Ossoff and Karen Handel, and never before had so many printed materials been produced and dumped on the electorate to get their attention. It became famous for this, and so she was one of these people who had a bag full of them, and she gave them to me on a dirt road outside of Tuskegee on our way there to visit her, and I took them back to Massachusetts and arranged them on my bedroom wall, which was my studio at the time. I liked the way it looked geometrically, but I didn't know how it was going to support itself, and I started using brown paper bags to unfold them and laminate the voting ephemera into the paper bags and then pin the whole thing on the wall with the bag handles. But what still needed to resolve was like how I was going to get it to hold materials and then how I was going to get that thing onto something else. None of that had been figured out. But I felt like something special had happened, so much so that I called Connie Tilton, my New York gallerist, in the middle of the night. And I was like, I have a feeling, I'm having a feeling in here. I don't understand what I'm looking at, but I think I like it. Because that desire to make something that doesn't already exist was really being answered. I'm making a shape that is challenging me, and it's calling for, I felt called upon to simply respond to its strange shape with geometry. So then the line formation that ends up responding to the shape of the thing, I end up filling those lines with red clay paste that I've collected from a pit in the ground in a historically black Georgia neighborhood that was fast gentrifying. A community center had been raised, and the condos hadn't been built yet. So I crawled into that hole, and the further down I went, the redder the clay was, and then I mailed that to myself and made it into a paste. So what happens at Project Row House happens. What happens at every step happens, and at this point, that's how it's like carrying over into paper. And then we come over here to Forever My Lady, my first show at Night Gallery, after being at Arc Athens residency in Athens, Greece with Miranda, where I collected a purse full of Pentelic marble dust from the quarry on Mount Pentelicus, where all of the marble for all the monuments in Greece come from. This Greco-Roman architecture, we understand it as symbolic for democratic monuments in this country, or the law. And so I take that material. When they told me that all those monuments came from the same mountain, I was like, Aristides, take me to the mountain. And sure enough, we met a really nice foreman who was kind enough to let me leave with, because nobody wants that dust except for me. So, but at this point, I don't realize that I'm employing these like really historically consistent, 100 years old historically consistent behaviors for a painter to prime a surface with marble dust. Crystal Mason, help me. Tell them about it. Tell them about it, Miranda.
Sure. Yeah. So.
They know. A lot of you who are old enough, you know who Crystal Mason is.
Yeah. Well, we wanted to highlight this because it's a Texas story that came out of Fort Worth, and to just acknowledge also like your integration of halftone lines. And what I mean by that, when I say that, I'm talking about these diagonally striped lines that together make an image, and just acknowledging, you've often talked about that relationship between what is a print, what is a painting, and this technique borrowed from printmaking that gets implanted into the painting. And
that's true, and this hasn't been resolved yet. So I was trying to figure out ways to get the halftone line into the surface. So I was like pinning them into the surface on that awning and into Still Remains. And at some point I figure out that in order to enlarge a halftone line in Virginia, actually in Richmond, Virginia, I keep coming back to the South and getting these innovations out of necessity. But I projected these halftone line images of Richmondites that the janitorial staff at ICA VCU told me they wanted to see on the street facing glass for this project I was doing for a show called The Great Force. And that was the big aha, that in order to get the halftone line onto this surface, I had to project it, because there's no print shop. I have no access to a print shop, and no print shop would work I just didn't have access to a print shop. So then I'm projecting Crystal's face onto the surface that I've made and painting the halftone lines into the surface. So sometimes they occur as lines, and sometimes they occur as her face. And we're told that when people put their phones up to the work, that the images sharpen and become immediately clear.
Miranda.
Sorry.
Can you tell the people what a Pnyx is?
A Pnyx, oh, I love talking about Pnyx. And so just to clarify, where you see those black and white diagonal lines, that's where there's Crystal Mason's face. Yeah, and I love talking about the Pnyx because it was such a bonding experience with you, Tomashi, to be in Athens, Greece, and thinking about where democracy began and what shape it took initially, and also acknowledging democracy existed for less than 200 years in ancient Greece. So the US, for better or worse, is the closest thing we've ever had to, and the longest running democracy that's ever existed on the planet Earth. Between ancient Greece and the founding of the United States, democracy vanished off the face of the planet for over 1,000 years, which is wild to acknowledge how fragile a flower it is. So Tomashi and I, during this residency, we walked the ancient sites. We were so lucky to have Iris Blaitakis with us, who's an incredible scholar of ancient Greek history, and she took us to the Pnyx, which is a hillside, because back in the day in ancient Greece, you had to be physically present to vote. So the idea was there was a moment where all eligible voters had to go to the Pnyx, this hillside, listen to an orator, and then actually raise their hand to cast a vote. And the idea was you had to stop what you were doing. It was your civic obligation. If you didn't stop what you were doing, there were folks who would go through the marketplace and mark you with red paint for not being at the Pnyx, so that folks knew.
They would gather people with a rope dipped in red paint. They were slaves. And one would hold one end. If Miranda and I are holding the rope, we would walk through the agora with that rope, and anyone who was around when everybody else was supposed to be at the Pnyx would be marked with that paint, and so be seen all through tents. Like, it would be impossible not to see that they had the mark of.
Oh, the idiotis. And the Greek word idiotis means private person and person who declines to vote. So the idea, the word idiot we use now, is actually come from this idea of someone who falls down on their duty and obligation to participate. This idea of the Pnyx being the first place on Earth where folks could gather as a community and vote on a principle. Bringing it back to Crystal Mason, Tomashi, you talked about the instance of Crystal Mason lived in Fort Worth, Texas. She cast a provisional ballot while on supervised release and then was imprisoned for it. She didn't know at the time that she wasn't eligible to vote. But the punishment for having done so was so severe. There was great concern, not only for Crystal Mason, but the idea that it would have a chilling effect on all folks who were trying to vote with provisional ballots. This idea that she would become an example and impede access to voting. And I remember, Tomashi, you did so much research into the history of voting that actually ties to quite a number of works in the show. And so the idea is layering fabric from Greece. So Tomashi, I love how wherever you are and whatever body of work it is, there's elements of the place there. Pentelic marble dust, so you see that's in the surface of the work. Voting ephemera, so vote from elections in the US, but also from Greece. So if you get close to the work, you can see Greek ballots integrated in it. And then, as you've so often done, Tomashi, citing the historical precedent, right? Historical moments of trauma and obstruction of justice. So in these red and blue mylar, and you talked a lot about that role of contrasting colors, right? It's not accidents that they're opposites on the color wheel, but a scene of a bus that had been used by the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee for the Freedom Rides set on fire. And then this setting on fire of a Baptist church. And so citations from those historic images being printed in halftone line on the mylar. So once again, looking at historical precedent to understand, well, how is this playing out in contemporary society?
Yeah. I think, again, I'll refer to Professor Kelly's essay in our catalog, that the work seeks to visualize histories of the pursuit of participatory democracy, idealized or idyllic images like these from the LBJ Library of the signing of the Voting Rights Act, interacting with images, fragmented half-tone line images of the realities that some of us are met with when we pursue the franchise, which tends to be terrorism and obstruction.
So we're going to press on around the corner.
As we're walking past this one, Time and Space, made about experiences of voting in Ohio. Also used voting ephemera from Ohio, but we also used, it was me. I also used Pentelic marble dust for that piece, and soil from the Lucy Depp Park, which I learned from Ohioans is a rare, intact, protected site on the Underground Railroad in Ohio. So also like entertaining a material notion of what the pursuit of democracy actually means, not in reference to Greece, but here in the United States.
Acknowledging this painting across the universe, it's the title inspiration for the show, and in so many ways, the title speaks to the expansiveness of your practice, Tomashi. This ability to stitch together so much across time and space, and also about different subjects. This show covers everything from transportation to voting rights to education. Name a pillar of what we talk about in democracy, and it manifests in this show, as well as joy. There's a lot of joy and celebration, and actually that comes through in this painting across the universe, highlighting two moments of joy. And so the piece is called Across the Universe Front Lash, and I love pointing it out too, Tomashi, because you shared that it's your first black on black painting. So this idea of paring down the palette and allowing the palette to evolve. I think that's one of the joys of showing the work at CAM, is that you can see that evolution of the palette as your practice progresses. And in this case, highlighting a historic performance at Morehouse College by Nina Simone, where she sang the famous song, "To Be Young, Gifted, and Black." However, the image that you see in the black on black section is not Nina Simone herself, but actually the audience responding to her work. So it's this idea of how did that song impact those who were present? How does it live on in their hearts and minds? And then in this orange halftone lines, acknowledging a historic moment where LBJ at the University of Michigan commencement address rolled out for the first time his intent for the Great Society legislation. And so LBJ, I know because I lived here, big deal in Texas. So wanted to highlight that Texas connection, but also wanting to highlight that ambition that you often talk about, Tomashi, of this sweeping slate of legislation that simultaneously gave birth to so many institutions that had a huge impact on society and the arts, the NEA, PBS, putting together this idea of legislation that would improve access for others to participate in democracy. And again, not taking an image of LBJ, but taking an image of the crowd listening to LBJ. So in that orange halftone, you see that. And also, last but not least, we haven't really talked about the awning shape of the canvases. So I do want to touch on that and then give it back to you. So if you look at the painting from the side, you see how it sits off the wall and projects forward. I actually love that projection into space. And just if you look at earlier works that Tomashi has created, especially Interstate Love Song from Georgia, Press and Curl, that's about your research in New York, they're actual awnings, right? Physical, actual awnings, elements of architecture, and then adapting that form in an abstracted way to how the canvas is supported. So I'll stop there and draw you in to talk about the work.
I had a lot of fun making this painting. It was one of my favorite things to make. I mean, I love making all these things, but I was really excited because I did a walkthrough before. I did a mini tour for one special staff member before we did this because he has class. And what was I telling him? Oh, I'm so emotional about all this stuff. I told him that by the time we get to this part of the bodies of work, I am arguably more free. So when, I'm back there with the Schoolhouse Rock and with Still Remains, I'm trying to figure out what my system is, what my image system is that's distinctly mine, that I might have to contribute. So I'm making this geometry and then I'm responding to the geometry. That's the logic, that's the image system. So I consider the research into issues of public concern or public space, whether or not we all recognize how we are implicated in it. The realms of policy that govern our experience of reality is public space as much as a building where a mural can be on the outside. So I'm considering the research as a part of my palette. And you know this, but I guess I'm saying this for y'all. So there's my brushes that I need. There's the earth materials that I need. There's the canvas that I need. There are the stories that I need. There's the past and there's the present. Then they'll all interact. There are the colors that I need. There's the water that I need. I think it was after Love Roller Coaster, as we move into the Great Society works, I'm starting to realize that each one of these areas of public concern have been addressed inside of this legislative wheel called the Great Society. And I find that I often hear a lot about the New Deal, but I don't hear the Great Society named as much. And that's where all of these things happened. And I think at this point I start to realize that access to the arts and humanities as a public good is right there between the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, the creation of public broadcasting service, all of these things that I'm very, very viscerally aware as I'm living through in my lifetime the closing of 150-year-old art schools. I started art school at the San Francisco Art Institute, which was the oldest art school west of the Mississippi River, and a historic home for avant-garde film in San Francisco. Now even SF MoMA doesn't have a film program. Anyways, this is the stuff that keeps me up at night. Like in our lifetime, Philadelphia PAFA, Philadelphia Academy of Fine Arts, no longer confers degrees. University of Arts Philadelphia is closed. So I'm thinking about what happens after me, and I start to wonder. It was just again, I just feel very late to the game, where I'm like, oh, the arts and humanities are a civil right. It was right there in the middle of all of this that I have all these questions about public space and access to education as a key. And this is the Great Society. And so, like Miranda said, at the time I was looking for how do I crosshatch or interact with this moment where LBJ announces his intention for the Great Society after the death of Kennedy. He's the first president to give a commencement speech at University of Michigan in 1963. And there, in this very garbled, very rough film documentation, you can hear him declare that every person should be able to reach for their dreams and use education to pull themselves out of poverty and to have imaginings that it's not the government's responsibility to draw a great artist into being, but it is their responsibility to make the arts and humanities accessible to everyone, wherever they are, whoever they are, so that the citizenry will be masters of their technology and not its mindless servants. I'm actually quoting bits from the National Foundation on the Arts and Humanities Act of 1965. So I focused on the audiences, not the orators. And so these vinyl strips, these PVC vinyl strips, have halftone lines going in one direction that zoom in on this blurry footage that I found of that commencement speech. That's the audience at University of Michigan, and then painted into this marble dust. So I'm getting more and more free. I'm no longer obligating to myself to creating what I didn't realize was a Greco. The Greek key that I was doing before, to make a line formation that responds to the odd shape of the geometry. My systems are getting better in the studio at this point. And I just let myself enjoy the geometry of these black paper bags, and then come on top of it. Well, first it was the canvas, then it was white gesso, then it was the brown paper bags, and then it's my marble paste. But this marble paste is made from the Yule Quarry, where Miranda took me on my summer residency in Colorado, and that is the American site in the Ute, the place of the Ute people in the Rocky Mountains, where the Lincoln Memorial and all of these monuments that we all live with in our lifetime, all of that was quarried in the 1800s. So they sent me home with buckets of that marble dust. Those guys were very generous. I didn't have to sneak out with a purse full. I have like buckets. So it was really fun at this point to like free myself up. At this point, I'm having fun moving the earthen material around and seeing how it interacts with sand and marble, and then painting black lines from this zoomed in image of the audience rising to their feet in delirious joy as Nina Simone and her band sing aloud to Be Young, Gifted, and Black for the first time in public at Morehouse University in 1969 after a decade of fighting for human rights and being met with terrorism and violence and assassination. There's like this delirious joy as she's urging people to love each other and love themselves to a mixed audience. And once again, it was Nia who turned me on to that film, and I realized, oh, those are the people who fought for the things that allowed me to have access to the arts and humanities that brings me here. It's only by that way that I could even find my way back to Houston. You know, like I'm one of those people, if I didn't have access to the arts and humanities and other people who were curious about history and mentorship and print shops and people who maintain libraries and museums and spaces, I don't believe I would have survived. I don't believe I would have survived. I just don't believe it. So yeah, when Nia showed me this image of the people who were there, the people who were the first line, you know, the people who were supposed to be the first beneficiaries of this hope that we could do better together, I wanted to impress their images with the audience who were the first to hear him say it out loud.
Well, Tomashi, I think it is who you are, that you are acknowledging the fabric of society that supported your practice. And I just want to close out by being one among many who's thanking you for bringing us together and for bringing forth this portal to education through the art. So thank you so much. We're grateful.
As the work that you're doing, and also like how that has been embedded within your practice and how that's been supported to continue through your practice.
I have always had too many questions about things, and my natural mother was a painter, and she gave birth to me here when she had come here after sustaining multiple losses in Los Angeles, and this is my mother who raised me. She's the one who had all the answers. So I was raised by her sister, who was a photographer and an engineer. Like she could walk into a building and tell us, and like stand and feel where the air was coming from, and tell us how the HVAC system was working. You know, she had a photographic memory for cars and for football and for basketball teams. Like basically like a good person to grow up with. You know, I kind of felt like my spirit chose to move through her sister and seek her out somehow. You know, I always tried to like make sense of how it was I was here. And so she was a good person. She was not the kind of parent who simply said, because I say so, or you know, you're asking too many questions. She indulged my questions. So like I feel like being able to work through all this stuff and be able to be in supportive environments and be with supportive, like, you know, classmates and fellow community members and chosen family who too are inquisitive and visualize how they are inquisitive, helps me to realize that it's just always been the way that I've been. But having a best friend who, I think she's gone now, she had to go to the airport, but having a best friend who is a researcher, who actually like studied education policy research and industrial labor relations. Like I've been very fortunate to stumble into close relationships with people who have yet more questions and yet more clues about how to ask questions and to look for answers in trusted sources in libraries, you know? So yeah, like now it's not just a tick that makes me like intolerable for, you know, some people. It actually gets to exist inside of this like palette of my methodology. It was helpful to go to a research institution where the arts are not prioritized to like really like thicken my skin. When I was at MIT, my research for my thesis was focused on informal economies, which is what brings me, this is where that sound comes from. A conversation between my mother and I, because she was my grandmother's oldest child who went to work with my great aunts in the 60s to clean people's homes, take care of their children, and cook for them. And yeah, so I don't know, it's like out of necessity I've done these things, but the painting practice helps me see that it's always been a regular part of a methodology that's just like the way that I am. And I'm fortunate that sometimes I have these documents. I don't have all the documents that I wish that I had, actually.
No one does.
You know? Thanks, librarian. That makes me feel a lot better. Yeah, like in this case, it's a part of the material of the work. I did a live performance about a guy that we're not talking about who's in the video room on the other side of that wall. My alter ego, Tommy Tonight, lip syncs the entirety of the Doobie Brothers 1978 album, Minute by Minute. Michael McDonald's leads. And this track was mixed by an opera director named Alexander Gideon, and he mixed the sound of my mother's voice talking to me about our family's labor history with our favorite album, one of our favorite albums, Minute by Minute. And because Cam is so innovative, we were able to embed this painting with sound of this conversation. The painting itself is made of, the vinyl strips are an abstracted image that my mother took before she died during the lockdown of trees, of leaves, cross-hatching with an image that I took being in public at Juneteenth Festival in Five Points, Denver, coming out of isolation. So yeah, this is the way it shows up now, but it's like, it's no different. But I didn't know that. Like every time I'm in a situation, I'm like, what am I gonna do? This is what's happening. This is what it ends up being. But because of an opportunity like this to see how it all plays together, I see that it is a recurring like pattern of the method. There's a book that you would like called The Land Claim, for a body of work that I did at the Parish Museum that's embedded with transcribed conversations with Black, Indigenous, and Latinx people from the East End of Long Island, talking to me and my team about their experiences of labor, land, maternal leadership in the Hamptons, and also like often being erased from the history of that place. It's been compulsive. I don't have my mother had a very music-filled house. She had an incredible vinyl collection. We listened to music all the time. And in every situation that I've experienced since leaving home, in every situation where I've been homesick, I have found that music that we sang together comes back to me. So like while I was at MIT, which is a very social, like a notoriously socially cold place, I started hearing R&B love songs that we used to sing to each other in harmony on our way to and from work and school. One of our favorites was After Seven's Ready or Not. Fred Moten wrote this book called In the Break on the Black radical tradition that the artist Renee Green told me I needed to read. And reading Fred Moten alone without like a group is very hard. But I was able to deduce. Listening to him I can do, but like it's something that it requires a book club for me. But I was able to get from that, there's a chapter called Aunt Hester's Scream, in which he talks about his growing up raised by a village of Black women who sang songs to each other that were popular music songs that were often, almost always, sung from the point of a male lead, a romantic song from a male lead being sung to another Black woman or girl. That's the way it was with me and my mother. And that was the first time I ever saw that formally written down, this experience that I have it's a spiritual one. So like my relationship, I believe that my first language is a visual language. Music is something like I wish that I had an Aretha in my throat or a Lauryn Hill in my throat. Like that's not my ministry, that's not my gift. But still music has been this like tool of communicating love. And what I love about the way Fred Moten describes the popular song, and also Nelson George in The Death of Rhythm and Blues, how these love songs for Black people and people who love Black music, but especially Black people who endure unseemly experiences of violence and injustice and simply trying to live, these love songs become these containers for the unspeakable truths that we share in common and we can understand. And it's like a beam. It's like a beam of understanding. So when I've been homesick, I have found that these songs have come back to me and ended up embedded in the work. I used to embed low frequency sounds of Whitney Houston singing You Give Good Love after she died, and people reading from Toni Morrison's Jazz, and people reading from Invisible Man into the floor of a piece, so that in order to hear it, people had to get on their knees and kneel and put their ear to the ground. I'd be forgetting how to do this stuff, but it's happening again. I tend to forget about these things. So the Tommy Tonight character, I was looking for this text to better explain it in a succinct way, because I'm hoping that, even though I think we're probably over, I'm hoping that somebody else will have another question. So the video room includes a selection of 5 videos featuring my alter ego Tommy Tonight, an amorous male R&B singer styled after 1990s black boy band idols. Tommy was born while I was at a summer residency at the Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture in 2019. Together with artists Ariel Renee Jackson, Nikita Gale, and Ashley Teamer, I formed the boy band The Talents, a nod to Octavia Butler's Parable of the Talents. Tommy has since reappeared in locations including Athens, Greece, Los Angeles, California, Boston, Massachusetts, Cambridge, Massachusetts, and the Baltimore Museum of Art, and most recently in the Great Sand Dunes of Colorado. His lip-synced songs explore love, liberation, and the complexities of living in a participatory democracy. I should probably kick this to my organizing curator, Miranda, because she insisted that he be included. I did not want this, actually. I didn't. I thought that it would confuse people, and I still didn't have a formal understanding of why he mattered to anyone else but me. Those aren't works that are ever sold, you know what I mean? But a historian named Rebecca Uchel wrote a great essay, an interview essay, that forced me to historicize Tommy in a book called Slow Jams for a show that I did at the university, what's it called? SUNY Purchase, State University of New York at Purchase. But she helped me to understand in her line of questioning, this is why good writers matter, because sometimes this is why we matter in ecosystem and community together, because I don't just know this stuff on my own. Good writers help me understand what's happening in ways that I didn't know. And she helped me understand that he emerged in a fit of anticipatory grief for what I thought was a move that my mother made that would lead to her death. We had been priced out of Los Angeles, like so many people are being priced out of their communities. And she moved all the way to Central California, to Bakersfield, where we have no people. And I found out after an earthquake had happened while I was in Maine. And I became so despondent and so sad and so scared that I resolved that I was going to sit alone and listen to recordings of LaToya Ruby Frazier and Bell Hooks talking at Skowhegan during different times at their visits. But then I go to the bathroom, and all these beautiful people that I'm there with are all dressed in drag. I forgot that there was a drag party that night. And Ariel Renee Jackson, who's a Austin-based artist, painted a beard on my face. They drew a beard on my face, and they drew a beard on Nikita Gale's face, who was just in the recent Whitney Biennial and did incredible work there. And then Ashley Teamer, who just did incredible work at the recent Prospect 6 Triennial. We all became a group that night. And what happened inside of me was that I got a break. The stress that was I'm lucky I didn't pass out, actually. I was so stressed, I was so scared that my mother being in a place where we have no community was gonna end badly, and it did. Because what we didn't know when my family couldn't keep eyes on her was that she was suffering from multiple untreated cancers that came to a head during the lockdown during that public health crisis when she couldn't get the help that she needed. So these recordings from my student time at MIT end up becoming the only recordings I have of her voice. Anyways, so it's about grief. There's a professor of drag studies at Tufts University named Kareem Kabchandani, who wrote a book called Decolonizing Drag. He helped me understand that the art historical context of drag performance is born of grief, mourning, kinship, and celebration. So it turns out my compulsions remain art historically consistent, that Tommy Tonight emerges out of this compulsion to get a break from the wildly body overwhelming feeling of grief, anticipatory and real.
Thank you, everyone. We have time for one more question.
I lied. I said I was going to not answer a little bit.
Hello, thanks for your talk. So my question is about research and your art practice. I'm thinking about how you turn research into a visual language and the systems that you create kind of from your process. I think you kind of talked to it about the Joseph Bowie said with the interaction of color and how that directly relates to, the interaction of color that you were talking, in the sign that you were talking about. But how do you develop these systems and transmute language and literature into material in the visual language? And I think it kind of comes through your compulsion of what you say as innovation as a form of necessity, or innovation of necessity. I think that's really Southern and Black all in itself.
Right. I love that.
Yeah, so
I love that. Like
so
this. Thank you. What's your name?
Marcel.
Marcel. Nice to meet you. I was recently in Winston-Salem for a group show for Young, Gifted, and Black. This body of a collection of work that I have a small piece in. But there's a young man there named Jordan Jones, who is a local historian, and we were all a bunch of us were hanging out in the gallery, and he asked me if I intentionally used haint blue in this self-portrait of myself as a magnet school student, my second grade class picture. The first image, the first framed photograph in the recent works over there is of my friend Alterance Gumby wearing a knitted color study I used this turquoise that I found. I was so broke after MIT, it was not a joke. It was I couldn't afford a bus pass. But so I started taking care of children, and I started knitting to calm my nerves, right? And I found myself excited. I didn't think I was ever gonna paint again, but when I was knitting, I was all excited. I started to get really excited about the possibility of introducing another color. I was literally could not wait. But I was very, very broke, so I was going to the Goodwill store to get 50-cent skeins of yarn, and that's where I would just find colors. And I found a color that looks like the inside of my hand, like flesh, and I found this turquoise. Anyways, fast forward a decade, Jordan, who knows everything about the history of Winston-Salem, everything. He's very casually, "Are you intentionally using haint blue?" I have no idea what he's talking. He's speaking Southern, but I grew up on the West Coast, with my elders not talking enough about what happened here. So thank you for that. Just thank you for that. I love these moments when parts of myself I can hear. You're a soundboard. Someone who knows more can tell me what I'm doing. So Jordan explained that, a haint is, what's a haint? Anybody know what a haint is?
It's a spirit.
A haint is a spirit. Yeah. Yeah, it feels very affirming, not to get too woo-woo in this space, but I rely on spirit, to figure all of this out, because my elders aren't here to tell me. So yeah, making up stuff out of necessity, I guess that's the answer. And I guess you are affirming that it is the nature of the people that I come from, who are from here, to figure it out. But luckily, printmaking, painting, drawing, being able to have had art teachers who were taught who were teaching in the style of Josef Albers, it's been the way to translate my questions and my thoughts, and to normalize them and contain them in a formal language that makes all of this less overwhelming for me. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Tomashi, Ryan,